Okay, so apparently my internet kicked me off and I had to quit recording. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off.
Chapter 30. I'm not sure exactly where it kicked me off, so I'm just going to reiterate what wetlands can filter water as well as the water filters through the soil, goes down to the soil. It kind of suspends out some of those pollutants and things like that.
Then we get into marine biomes, which are basically saltwater biomes. And this is where basically, well, the oceans can be divided up into different zones, just like a lake. And so within marine biomes, just like with freshwater biomes, going to determine on the amount of light, proximity to the shore, temperature, and nutrients as well. So we have a couple of zones, or major zones. The first is the photic zone, and so that means light, right? So you have light there to support photosynthesis. And then where the light does not reach would be the aphotic zone. You know that A means without. Okay, and this would be kind of, depends on the area, but definitely lower than 650 feet, all the way down to maximum depth of 36,000 feet. So here are the different marine zones. Intertidal zone here, which we'll talk about. Then we get into areas near the shore, and then we get out into open ocean. And out in the open ocean, you have the photic zone, okay, where light can reach. And then you have the aphotic zone down here at the bottom. There's a twilight zone where there's a little tiny bit of light, but not enough to support photosynthesis. And then you have down here, basically complete darkness. Before we get into the ocean though, we have kind of a transition area called the estuary, and that is where you have fresh water and salt water mixing, basically where the oceans and the rivers meet, and there is a varying level depending on the day, the time of day, the season, varying levels of salinity or salt content in that water. Okay. Estuaries are very, very, very important areas for living organisms. Many marine animals come here or use the estuary at some point in their life cycle. Okay, whether it's for reproductive purposes or feeding purposes or whatever, estuaries are very, very important for marine life. Also, it's a lot of where we get a lot of our commercial fishing areas, like with shrimps and crabs and so forth as well. And lots of birds, like we mentioned, like to nest here. A lot of organisms like to use the estuaries for different purposes. Okay, so now we move out into the ocean, and the first is the intertidal zone, and that's where the land meets the ocean, and it is going to be covered and exposed by covered by water and then exposed to the air based on the tide. Okay, so organisms that live here have to be able to survive being submerged and then also exposed to the air during other times of the day. So you might have like barnacles and mussels and different things, starfish and so forth that live in these areas, sea urchins and so forth. Then the near shore zone, which kind of gets a little bit farther away, extends down from the low tide line all the way to where the sea floor, basically the continental shelf, basically drops off like we saw in the other video. And depending on your temperature, your latitude, there may be kelp forests or coral reefs in those areas. And in the tropical areas, you would have the coral reef, which combines the calcium carbonate skeleton of coral, which remember are animals in phylum Cnidaria, that have built up over the years. And the reefs provide shelter and food for lots of other different organisms, and we can find large reefs in the Caribbean, the Pacific areas, Indian Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, and so forth. Most reef-building corals contain single-celled photosynthetic protists called dinoflagellates. These dinoflagellates provide food for the coral animals. And I'm going to put a link to a news clip. We watched the bioluminescent tides off the coast of San Diego back when we were talking about the protists. And right now, this week, they're actually experiencing bioluminescent tides again, which is caused by dinoflagellates. And so I wanted you to just watch that. There's some really cool footage of dolphins swimming, and they kind of bioluminesce. It's really neat. So I'll have you guys look at that. That's the weird video that was playing in the beginning of the last video, like out of nowhere. My computer is really weird today. So then we move out into the open ocean, and that's where water is really deep and wave action doesn't really have an effect on the bottom. It's not going to push and pull plants out and uproot them. So in the open ocean, the bottom is too deep for plants to anchor and still receive enough sunlight to grow. So most of ocean life is going to be dependent upon photosynthetic plankton or phytoplankton. Okay, so that's going to be basically the bottom of the food chain. The producer in the open ocean is those phytoplankton protists. Then phytoplankton is going to be consumed by zooplankton, which are other protists that eat the photosynthetic ones. And then the zooplankton and some phytoplankton perhaps are going to be eaten by other marine mammals, including whales. So even in the photic zone, the amount of life in the open ocean depends basically on the availability of nutrients. And there's two places where the nutrients come from. The first one is runoff, and the other is upwelling, which is basically differences in temperature and so forth can bring nutrient-rich water from the bottom, because all of the dead things have basically settled at the bottom, basically kind of an overturn in bringing up those nutrients from the bottom. Finishing up on some human impacts of aquatic ecosystems. Couple of threats: pollution and overfishing. There's a lot of press about plastics in refuse is trash. Basically, plastics getting into aquatic environments and causing issues with animals trying to eat them or getting caught into plastic things and dying from that, and also overfishing in areas where that's not regulated. And then the last place of the ocean is the ocean floor, part of the aphotic zone. It's not adequate, obviously, for photosynthesis. And so basically the food for those organisms down at the bottom is going to be excrement and dead bodies that have sank to the bottom. A lot of crazy looking fish at the bottom. Sea stars, sea cucumbers, some mollusks and so forth can live down there. Okay, So I will end this chapter, and then I will begin another one for chapter 31. So make sure you check that video out.